Today is March 5th, 2024. This is episode 57 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Mike Koomar. Tonight, Mike and I will go over some of the epic action from the weekend and even some of the early action this week that just wrapped up, Mike. But first, as always, let's go with your team of the week.
Thanks, Sean. My team of the week, there have been a lot of good teams to pick from this week. My Baylor Bears being one of them, but my team of the week is going to be the Tennessee Volunteers. So they came into last week, they had a golden opportunity to try to get a hold of that last number one seed in the NCAA tournament, as well as solidify their chances to win the SEC regular season. And they all but did that with a couple of huge wins over the week. First off, they got an 84-92 win at home against the Auburn Tigers. Game that, albeit they won by 8, this game was back and forth all the way until the end. Really good game. Dalton Connect just showed up for this game. He had 39 points, quickly becoming a Player of the Year candidate to rival Zach Edey. And then following that, they went on the road to Alabama this weekend, and they got a convincing 7-point win on the road against the Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama led for a good portion of this second half, but Marcus Spears' 22 points wasn't going to be enough for a balanced attack by Tennessee. A good defensive performance for a team that's not otherwise a tremendous defensive team, but this was a weird one. Usually you see the SEC has been high-powered offenses this year with no defense. Both teams shot under 40% from field goal range and 30% or under from 3 points. So this was a different kind of win for Tennessee, but they got the job done. They've got a one-game lead right now over the South Carolina Gamecocks for the SEC and a chance to beat them this week to take the regular season title.
Yeah, Mike, Tennessee, we talked about it last time, that the number one seed, the last one, was probably theirs if they won the rest of their games. Can't say that about North Carolina and Arizona. Tennessee has 2 ranked wins since then. I've actually moved them into that spot. A couple other people still a little bit hesitant, but we'll go into bracketology later, but they got the job done. Like you said, Connect has been awesome, but he only had 13 points against Alabama. Team still goes on the road and gets a W. A team effort there. They were down by they're down at halftime in this one. They're down by, I think, 9 in the second half, but they get the job done holding the country's number one offense to just 74 points on, just under 70 possessions. So, that's an incredible points per possession output from a team that shoots as many threes as Alabama, but they only made 9. So Tennessee, job well done there. You talked about it, that they do control their own destiny for an outright chance at the SEC. Now, Mike, we're going to go into the team that is the only one that can, take them off of that outright title, and that's the South Carolina Gamecocks. They did go into Rocky Top and beat them earlier this year, but they're going to have to do it again for at least a share. But on Saturday, they got the job done at home against Florida, 82-76. Michi Johnson hit some clutch shots down the stretch for what was kind of a comeback victory. Florida led for most of this one. Walter Clayton had 20 points for the Gators, and the Gators picked up a pretty big win tonight that we'll get to in a little bit, Mike. But South Carolina gets the job done. We talked about all their hype, how they kind of fell flat on their face with that big loss to Auburn and then a home loss to LSU. But they've picked it up with 2 road wins against quality opponents, and then they took down Florida at home. South Carolina's legit.
Yeah, absolutely. And Florida led this game by as much as 10 points in the second half with about 12 minutes to go. So Florida was certainly in the driver's seat in this game, and South Carolina scraped and clawed their way back, kind of shot their way back into this game, played some absolutely fantastic offense in the second half, scoring 51 points. But this was a character win for South Carolina. There's been a lot of questions about them since they got to that 11th ranked high that they've been on this year. They fell kind of flat on their face, like you said, Sean. They had a 40-point loss to Auburn earlier in the year. However, this was a big come-from-behind win. This is a good Florida team, that's flown under the radar for most of this season. They just really got back in the rankings last week before dropping back after this week. But A huge character win for South Carolina. Could really give them a lot of momentum, and they're going to have a chance to get that SEC regular season title. They got to win this week on Wednesday against Tennessee, and they got to go on the road to Starkville to take on Mississippi State, which is not an easy win, as we've seen this year. Mississippi State has time and time again this year put favorite teams on their feet, to their knees, rather, in Starkville. So this could be a tough finish for South Carolina, but could be a rewarding one if they get the 2 wins.
Yeah, I think at this point, Mike, Lamont Paris from South Carolina has got to be the coach of the year. There really isn't another competitor for me at this point. They were picked 13th in the league by us and 11th by the coaches, and they are, at worst, going to be second. So, they're not done yet. They want to get some wins in the NCAA tournament. They're certainly capable of that, but what they've done so far is very impressive. Let's talk about Florida, Mike. This was a missed opportunity for the Gators. They had a chance to pick up a quad 1 road win. They ultimately come up short, but they bounce back in probably the best way that you can ask for. A 105-87 victory over Alabama. The Tide have now dropped 2 in a row in March. 105 for the Gators. They got the offense going. 2 players with over 20 points and 4 players with over 19 points. A really good way to bounce back from a disappointment for Florida.
Yeah, I mean, just asking for a friend, where is the defense in the SEC? Because it really kind of seems non-existent. They've got some high-powered offenses, but Florida should not be scoring 105 points in any game this year. They're a good team. They're not that good. With that being said, they had a tremendous second half in this one. This game was close-ish in the first. I think Florida had a 10-point lead at halftime, but this lead blew wide open in the second half. Alabama got dominated on the boards. They got dominated in every aspect of this game. The only real bright side for them was Marcus Spears with 33 points, and he was 9 of 9 from the free throw line. But other than that, I mean, Florida just absolutely dominated. They came back in the best way possible. Meanwhile, Alabama, following their loss, another loss here, kind of an embarrassing performance. Not losing to Florida, but the way that they did, certainly not a good way to end the season. They're kind of stumbling into the end of the regular season here, Sean.
Yeah, we'll go over some of the bracketing rules later, and but they're gonna drop some seed lines. We've gone over their season multiple times. Great metrics, bad results. Results have caught up. Results have now fallen back down. They've dropped 2 in a row here. They're still 20-10. They're still probably going to be a top 4 protected seed. They do host Alabama on Saturday for their last game of the regular. Or no, they are Alabama. They host Arkansas on the last day of the season for a chance to be the number 3 seed in the SEC in the tournament. But Mike, Florida had 46 free throws in this game. I don't think I've seen a college game have that many free throws from one team. I think we had a couple get into the low 40s, maybe high 30s, but
46.
And credit to Florida, they made 40 of them, which is 87%. But you cannot
that's really good.
You cannot give teams 46 free throws. I mean, that's half's worth of scoring if you go 35 for 46.
They got 40 points, Sean. They got pretty much enough to win most basketball games that aren't in the SEC. They got half of that in the first half, or just on the free throw line, not the first half, the free throw line. But I mean, Florida, they made 7 threes. That's not, an absurd amount of threes for scoring 105 points.
Yeah.
But
you cannot give up 100 if you give up 7 threes.
And now Alabama's given up over 100 points in 2 of their last 4 games. They gave up 117 to Kentucky earlier. Those 2 games that they didn't, one of them they gave up 88 to Ole Miss. Ole Miss is not a great basketball team. So, man, I do not think this is Alabama's year. When you look at how poorly they were performing on the defensive end, this is really going to catch up to them in March, Sean.
Yeah, we've said this with a couple of these teams, Mike, that, they are probably going to beat the teams that they're way better than because they're just not going to be able to hang. But once they face another team that can run with them for a couple minutes, they're probably going to lose.
No chance.
Saw it about we've seen it with Auburn, we've seen it with Bama, we've seen it with Kentucky, but they are outside the top 100 in defensive efficiency. They are actually number 100. I do not believe that has tonight's game.
That's going to drop
into the numbers, so that's going to get worse. But last year, Mike, the SEC had a lot of well-rated defenses, but it actually just turned out that very few of the teams in the conference could actually shoot threes, and that was kind of sought out in the tournament. Like a lot of those 7, 8, 9 seeds from the SEC were just bad three-point shooting teams, so it's kind of easy to defend that when that's the entire league. But now it is completely flipped, and I mean, Tennessee is a good defense. They're ranked number 3. But you've got Kentucky, who's 96, Bama, who's 100. You've got Auburn, who is good at times. Defensively, they're ranked number 5. They've had some great defensive performances, but also some lapses, too. So I think the conference tournament will be really fun. But once you have a team across the line from you in the tournament that can match your athletes, gotta be able to guard, and very few of these teams can.
Yeah.
But Mike, one more look at the standings. Kentucky did beat Arkansas 111-102. Arkansas had it was kind of their Super Bowl tough season for them. Khalif Battle had 34, but Kentucky's putting it in the bucket enough. At this point, they had 7 players get double-digit points. They're starting to figure out their rotations. They play Tennessee in Tennessee on the final day, 4 o'clock on Saturday. We'll talk about that game later. But anything to add on Kentucky before we get into the standings?
Yeah, I think with Kentucky, we'll see how that game is against Tennessee. But right now, I don't have this team getting out of the round of 32. And it's for that same concept that they can't play defense. Look, Arkansas should not score 102 points against anybody other than maybe Mississippi Valley State, right? And Kentucky has continuously, time and time again, given up more than 85 points in a game, right? You look at recently, 95 to Alabama, 89 to Mississippi State, and 102 to Arkansas. If you can't play defense, you're not going to advance. I believe the metric, Sean, is all of the champions in the last 10 years or so have been in the top 50 in both offense and defense. You got to be able to play both sides of the ball, and Kentucky cannot do that right now. So I don't think they're going to advance very far.
Yeah, there's 95% of the Final Four teams in the Ken Pom era, which is probably about our lifetimes, Mike, probably about 20, 25 years. 95% of those teams are top 20 in offense, top 40 in defense. So you still have to score it, but you do have to be able to win the game where the shots don't fall. To win a national title, you got to play 6. You got to win 6. You're not going to shoot 60% from the field all 6 times. It's just not going to happen. But we'll look at the standings here. Some teams have 2 games left. Some teams have 1. So Tennessee's leading at 13-3. South Carolina just behind at 12-4. Bama at 12-5. Kentucky and Auburn at 11-5. Florida at 11-6. It's a pretty good top 6, Mike. Mississippi State and LSU at 8-8. Texas A&M, Ole Miss, and so on. I don't think we have to go past that. But there's going to be some good teams playing a day early here in the SEC in that 5, 6, 7 slots that probably typically the 5th, 6th, and 7th teams in the SEC aren't that good. So I think the SEC tournament will be the most fun to watch as a neutral fan because there's a ton of good teams. We've haven't seen all of them play each other twice this year. And, I think it'll be fun, but at this point, it's either Tennessee or South Carolina's to lose, or it is Tennessee or South Carolina's title at this point. But I think we'll wrap up the SEC unless you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think the one team, Sean, I'll wrap up with, I'll say is the my exciting team to watch in the tournament is going to be Mississippi State. This is a team that was really hot. I think they won like 5 or 6 straight games in February before they had that heartbreaking loss to Kentucky. They lost on Saturday to Auburn on the road by 15, a pretty convincing loss. But they've got 2 good opportunities to rectify those 2 losses this week. And I think they're going to be a really exciting team to watch on a neutral court.
Yeah, they're a good basketball team. Tolu Smith has missed the first half. Josh Hubbard went shot for shot with Kentucky. They just didn't have the ball last. But,
Yeah.
you know, I think they're in the 8th spot now, Mike, or 7th spot. Wouldn't be surprised if they push past the 1 or 2 seed in the tournament. Not that they need to. They're still going to the dance either way, but want to get out of that 8-9 game, which is where they're headed at this point. We're going to head to your Big 12, Mike, and we'll start off with a team that could have been your team of the week. That's your Baylor Bears. 2 victories at the Foster Pavilion. Knock off Kansas. Kevin McCullough does play, despite all signs pointing him not to. Doesn't make a difference, though. Baylor gets the job done. Solid performances across the board from all the starters. Not much off the bench, but Baylor gets the job done. And then they beat Texas yesterday after a tough first half. So good week for Baylor.
When they took down TCU on the road in Fort Worth, that was a really gutsy win for the Bears, and they kind of controlled that second half. They won by 8. I feel like they won by a lot more. Going into Saturday against Kansas, nobody expected Kevin McCullough to play. Not even Kansas fans. I don't even know if Bill Self expected him to play.
Bill Self, 2 days before, said that they're preparing that he might not come back for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like he's going to play to me, but he did.
And he played well. He had 20 points in this game, 32 minutes, very effective basketball for Kevin McCullers. He tied Hunter Dickinson as the leading scorer for the team. So that was a huge obstacle for the Bears. And this was a tight game in the first half. Baylor had a 1-point lead, but they kind of opened up their shot in the second half. And one thing that really stuck out to me, Yves Missi continues to play some of his best basketball of the season when he's matched up against Hunter Dickinson. It's almost like he is ready for that matchup. He played phenomenally. The Bears shot well, 41% from three-point range, and they got the job done. This game got a little tight in the last minute of the game, but Baylor got it back to stable, and Kansas didn't even foul all the way coming down the stretch. So impressive, which leads us to yesterday on Monday when the Bears were getting crushed early on against the Texas Longhorns. From about 1 minute into the game, actually about 3 minutes into the game, Baylor was down by 10, and they were kind of down by 10 all the way until we'll call it the 11-minute mark in the second half. So for about 30 minutes in this game, they were down by double digits until they put a box and one on Max Asmus, who had an incredible game, and they started to make some shots of their own. Bears shot 74% in the second half, and then both them and UT got a lot of garbage free throws at the end of the game. But the Bears get a much-needed win against the Longhorns, and Sean, they may be trending towards a 2 seed. I think you have them in the 2 line right now.
Yeah,
the big dance.
I did, and I've said this over the years, but if in case anyone hasn't listened, there can only be 4 teams from each conference or a conference in the top 4 seeds, and they've got to be across the 4 regions. So you might see a little bit of Big 12, the unfortunate seedings for the Big 12 because of that. So they could be all 1s, they could be all 2s. Highly unlikely, but there's no ruling on that. But I do think that the second place team in the Big 12 will get that last 2 seed. And I thought it was Baylor after they beat Kansas. They've got a better schedule than Iowa State. They've got equally as good of wins, and they actually played a couple good teams in the non-conference, unlike the Cyclones. Yesterday, obviously,
and they beat the Cyclones,
and they beat them. Yesterday, obviously, helps. We're going to see this sort of performance, Mike, on Big 12 Monday until it ends. Got a big home crowd on Saturday, high energy. Less than 2 days later, you got to play another team on your home floor. It's like these kids are in college. It doesn't matter how mature or professional of a team you are. It's just not the same. They were able to get across the line, though, which is very important. Considering Max Asmus across the line had a pretty awesome day. His Texas career high of 33, obviously did that multiple times at Oral Roberts. But Jalen Bridges went shot for shot with him, and Baylor gets the W. Very, very impressive not to get a letdown loss here.
Yeah.
But Mike, we're going to go to the another Big 12 game that probably was a little bit closer than we expected on Saturday. That was Houston needing a broken play, shovel pass to Jamal Shed to beat Oklahoma by 2. Porter Moser's men are on a skid. They nearly get this one, but the Cougars hold on. They get a lucky break, to be honest, and they're going to be a 1 seed.
Like you said, Sean, a busted play. Jamal Shed gets the game winner with less than, I think, a half a second to go in this one. I talked about last week, Oklahoma does show up for the big games at the Lloyd Noble Center. They are a really good team against number ones. We saw it last year when they crushed Alabama on their home floor despite having a really bad season. But it's got to be regrouping time for Oklahoma now. They are struggling right now against Cincinnati. They're now trailing by 5 at the under 8 timeout.
At home.
So it's a little closer now. But they're at home. And Oklahoma's a bubble team, Sean. They have officially entered the bubble, and this loss really hurts them. It gives Cincinnati a fleeting chance of getting into the tournament. But Oklahoma needs this game. They need this one, or they need the next one against the Longhorns.
Yeah, they have 4 losses at home, Mike, in the conference, and of the 18 games, 9 of them are home. If they lose to Cincinnati, they're going 4-5 at home in conference play. Now the bubble had a bad weekend, so I think they're safe for now. But you don't want to have to go into Saturday's game against Texas needing to win.
You need to win on the road.
Because you're probably not going to win that game.
No.
But let's hope they figure it out. They were pretty good early on in the year, rightfully so, and then for all of these middle-of-the-pack Big 12 teams, it's about winning at home and beating the teams at the bottom on the road.
Oklahoma's not done that.
This is a team at the bottom at home. I mean, Cincinnati's a good team, but it doesn't get much easier than this in the Big 12. And let's hope that they can get across the line. Had a couple other games, Mike. We've got Cincinnati beating Kansas State, which essentially ends the Wildcats' at-large hopes. And you have Iowa State escaping Orlando with a narrow victory, leaving them at least a half shot at the regular season title. They trail Houston by 1 game. Baylor is a game and a half behind them. And then there's a whole mess of teams at 9-7, 8-8, 8-9, and 7-9. But this will be the only year of the 14-team Big 12 tournament, if I'm not mistaken. You lose 2 and gain 3 next year, right?
Gain 4, yeah. It's going to be a 16-team league. Yeah,
so
Arizona State, Colorado, Utah.
So still 14. This is the only year. You get the double bye, just like the Big Ten has done ever since Rutgers and Maryland came in. So really, obviously, the conference title is on the line here in the Big 12. But other than that, it's about getting to that double bye, which BYU, Kansas, and Texas Tech all at 9-7. Somebody has to finish 4th.
Yeah.
And then we have our Wednesday teams of Cincinnati, UCF, Oklahoma State, and West Virginia. Maybe Cincinnati can get out of that game with a win here because they do have West Virginia on Saturday, but that seems pretty set in stone too. So we're going to have these middle-of-the-pack teams like playing each other on Friday of the Big 12 tournament, I think, or Thursday or Friday. So more opportunities to try and get out of the mess, which is the 7-10 seed range in the bracket. But Mike, I think that's all for the Big 12, just at 24 minutes here. So we'll go through the Big East rather quickly before we get into what just happened in the Big 10. Really one game of note in the Big East. We'll get to all the bubble teams later. But Creighton gets the job done against Marquette by 14. 2 huge wins at home in the past couple weeks for the Jays. Marquette, obviously, without Oso Ighodaro and Tyler Kolek, but they fight pretty hard for most of the game. They just run out of gas late, but Creighton seems to be peaking at the right time.
Yeah, Marquette didn't have their top players playing in this game. They had some big losses, but how about the Jays being able to buckle down later in the Big East season, potentially playing some of their best basketball now of the year with this 14-point victory? You talk about their last several, they had that hiccup against St. John's, but before that, a dominant win against the Seton Hall team that went wire to wire with them in 3 overtimes earlier in the year. So, and of course, that signature UConn win by 19 points earlier for that one. So the Jays are playing really good basketball, and this could be a team that right now they're probably at a 3, but another team trending towards the 2 line if things can kind of fall the right way. Yes, Duke and Carolina have to play each other on Saturday. And yes, who knows what's going to happen with Iowa State coming down the stretch, or a couple of other teams. Creighton could certainly fall into that 2 line.
And they're likely to get the 2 seed in the Big East tournament. UConn obviously wins the outright title for the first time since '98. Pretty shocking stat there. Obviously, they left the conference and came back since then. They've had 3 national championships since then.
3, yeah.
Still no Big East title. Got it this year. Marquette is 13-5. They're a half game ahead of Creighton, but they do have a road game against Xavier and a home game against UConn. And with Tyler Kolek out until at least the Big East tournament, you'd have to say that they're definitely not going to win both of those, and maybe could lose both. But Creighton looking like the 2 seed in the Big East tournament, you have to say that they're trending in the right direction. They're getting some contributions off the bench, which is not something that we've said really all year. They had 16 points against Marquette, and then in their wire-to-wire win against Seton Hall, they had 14 points off the bench. That's night and day from what they were getting before. Sometimes it was 0. So looking good for the Jays. Mike, we had a Big Ten game that delayed our recording a little bit, and it was worth every minute. Purdue goes into Illinois and gets the outright Big Ten title with a 77-71 victory. Illinois led this game at halftime, led this game at the last media timeout, if I'm not mistaken, but it's Purdue and not via Zach Edey how they get across the line. Some big shots from their guards.
Yeah, I mean, Zach Edey had a tremendous game. He had 28 points in this one, majority of which came in the first half. But Illinois had a 6-point lead in the first half. They were looking really good. And coming down the stretch, man, Purdue made some offensive plays. 2 dagger threes in the last minute of this game off of offensive rebounds, including the last one, Sean, from Mr. Lawyer over there, who made about a 45-foot bomb to put the Illini away. Pretty incredible shot there. It was contested, too, by Terrence Shannon, which gave him the 6-point lead with about 15 seconds to go in this one. So Illinois, this is a tough loss. They played a pretty good game in this one, but they did not shoot well from 3-point range, just 4 of 16. And coming down the stretch, they had open looks. They had good-looking shots for 2s and 3s that they could not make. A couple of questionable calls fell in favor of Purdue, but at the end of the day, Purdue executed incredibly coming down the stretch, and they get arguably their most impressive win of the season, despite some earlier big wins against Marquette and Arizona.
Yeah, they Edey 28, solid game, made his free throws, or he was 2 for 4, sorry, did not make his free throws, really. But Lawyer and Smith get the job done. Lawyer has been someone who's been unplayable at times this year. Mike Painter's had to yank him because he can't really play defense, and when his confidence is shot and he's not making shots, there's really no reason for him to be out there. But he hits 2 huge threes in this one, and then Smith with the dagger. Obviously, Purdue, I think, didn't really play great for 35 minutes, but they get across the line. But Illinois, Mike Domask, 20 points. He was their go-to guy down the stretch. Terrence Shannon, just 3 of 13 from the field, 11 points. He seemed invisible to me, Mike. Sometimes I had to make sure that he was the one who was on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, Terrence Shannon had an awfully quiet senior night, pretty disappointing. 0 for 4 from the 3-point line. Just probably his worst game of the year for the Fighting Illini. Comes in a game where they needed him to be his best. Domask played well. He had 20 points, but he missed a couple of crucial buckets coming down the stretch, including a layup to the hoop that, I mean, it was pretty open, right? Hawkins also not his best game. He only had 13. He did have 9 rebounds, though, which was impressive. But Illinois certainly didn't play their best game either, Sean, I would argue. Shannon was, like you said, invisible. You couldn't really tell he was out there. Hawkins had an okay game. Guerrero did have a good game, but it wasn't going to be enough for the Fighting Illini.
Yeah, they end up the season on the road at Iowa, who's suddenly pretty resurgent, and then Purdue will host Wisconsin on Sunday for their senior day. and I guess a victory parade because they have already have the outright title. They lead Illinois by 3 games, Northwestern and Nebraska rounding out the double byes in the Big Ten before Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan State, Indiana, and Ohio State wrap up the single byes, and then obviously the Wednesday teams down there at the bottom. But Purdue headed for the 1 seed, headed for the Midwest region, headed for an Indianapolis round of 64 game. At this point, Mike, do they have anything left to prove in the Big Ten tournament? I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if we see Matt Painter do some load management. Because 3 games in 3 days, just 5 days before a round of 64 game, in a game that you don't really need to win, I wouldn't be shocked if Purdue takes it easy in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I mean, does Purdue even really need to win a game is my question, right? Like, nobody else is gunning for the Midwest region in this one. Houston's obviously going to take the South region, and it's pretty obvious that UConn's going to take the East region. So, yeah, I mean, I just don't really think they have much. I think they got to finish the season up on a high note against Wisconsin, and if they can win that game, I mean, yeah, I don't really think that the Big Ten tournament holds much value to the Purdue Boilermakers.
Yeah, if you're in if you're in a power conference and you are not on the bubble, you either want to lose in the first round or win the tournament.
Yeah.
The committee, there's only 12, there's only so many of them, and they can only watch so many games on that Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They often do not watch the power conference games. We've heard some rumors, and their seedings over the years have, like the semifinal game between Purdue and Illinois round 3, say for example, it's not going to move either team, and it probably shouldn't. They should probably be watching the automatic bids, who they haven't seen all year, who they're pushing between a 12, 13, or 14. But what is Purdue going to prove by beating teams that they've already beaten? And the Big Ten tournament championship game is Selection Sunday, and there's a chance Purdue could be playing Thursday if they 3 games in 3 days and just 3 days off before your next one, and then potentially another one 2 days later. They don't have a skeleton crew on the bench, but I don't think it means. I just don't think the Big Ten tournament will mean a whole lot to the Boilers.
I agree, and if you look at the last 3 NCAA tournament champions post-COVID, you look at Baylor, a team that lost in the second round of the Big 12 tournament to a Cade Cunningham Oklahoma State. Didn't really mean that much to them. I don't think they put that much effort to it. And then you look at UConn, who last year they lost in the semifinals to Marquette. It meant a little bit more, perhaps, to UConn, but they did not put their best foot forward in the Big East. Both of those teams got a little bit longer of a rest, and it worked out for both of them going and executing in March Madness. Neither team really struggled. Kansas, on the other end, they swept through the Big 12 tournament and then swept through the NCAA, so that's a different story. But you don't want to be that team that gets to the finals, loses in the finals, and then you just did all that work for really nothing because your seed goes nowhere.
And the last 2 Big Ten tournament champions, Mike, Iowa 2 years ago did lose to Richmond in the 5-12 game.
First round.
And then obviously Purdue loses to Fairleigh Dickinson last year in the first round game.
Yeah.
So
and
hopefully
before that, Illinois lost in the second round to Loyola Chicago.
Yeah, so the Big Ten tournament champion has not had any success really in the Big Ten tournament. Hope for their sake that changes this year.
Yeah.
Mike, we're going to get into bracketology really quickly. This was done yesterday, before yesterday and today's games. I posted it on the Instagram. We've gone over the 1 seeds like that. Baylor getting the 2 seed, as Mike said. We have some, just like the Big 12, there can only be 4 SEC teams in the top 4 seeds. I've got Tennessee, Bama, Auburn, Kentucky as those. We've got South Carolina down there at the 6. And then after that, Florida with their big win will probably be separated, but 7, 8, 9, 10, not much separating those teams. No. While, a bad loss could send you down from 8 to 11, for example, or, it's just it matters a lot at this point. Gonzaga has played themselves pretty clear with a nice win against St. Mary's. We didn't talk about that, Mike. We both predicted that they'd get the job done there, and that game really wasn't close. Ever.
Never close.
Graham Ike was pretty terrific in that one for the Zags. They're going to avoid Dayton, most likely. You've got Florida Atlantic losing a couple games here and there, getting closer. They still should be okay. And then you have Villanova, who's played themselves out of the first four. And then the last four in being New Mexico, Seton Hall, St. John's, Colorado. A big mess in there. Obviously, Michigan State lost, and I moved them up. Well, some other teams had worse losses than Purdue and Mackey. So that's really why it happened there. I've got Virginia and Wake Forest as my first two teams out. Wake has just the singular road win all year. They've lost 2 road games since their big win at Duke. Obviously, they're very good analytically, but I just don't think that the committee has ever really given respect to teams that can't win away from their home floor like that. And then Virginia, Mike, is there an uglier team to watch in college basketball than Virginia right now? I mean, they've gotten blown out a couple times by non-tournament teams here.
Ugly game.
And then Providence and Utah rounding out my first 4 out. Not much to say. Providence did get a victory against Georgetown today. Absolutely needed. And they host UConn on the final day of the regular season. UConn's not going to really need that game. So Friars got a chance to win it. And then 2 other teams, I considered Pittsburgh and Iowa as well. They're going to have to do something, and then someone else is going to have to lose, I think, to get into that conversation. But that's bracketology, Mike. Any questions before we move on to our pick'em?
Yeah, I think when a lot of people look at some of the bracketology, Sean, I think this is pretty spot on for the most part. Something to look for. We talked about 7 through 10 teams being pretty fluid. St. Mary's loses before the WCC finals, Sean. Are they on the bubble?
They get an auto bye to the semis. So if they do lose to a San Francisco, I think, then there's a chance they could be dragged into that conversation. Yeah, I think I was a little generous to only drop them to a 7 seed. I've seen them as low as a 10, but mostly in the 8-9 game. It really is because those teams are so close that I didn't really know how much. The other teams didn't really win either, so I didn't like the team that started the day as a 5 or 6 and end of the day is a 10. It's just a big drop after 30 games. But if I were to do it again now, I probably would put them at least on the same seed line as Gonzaga. I think I was a little bit too harsh on Gonzaga too. It seemed like for teams that don't play as many high-profile games, you have to keep these ones that they do play at higher regard than maybe a singular game for Michigan State or something like that. But at this point, I would have St. Mary's no higher than Gonzaga seed line, which is probably both in the 8-9 at this point.
Yeah. And I think another interesting one, Sean, is you got Nebraska at the 9 line right now. Nebraska's a double bye in the Big Ten tournament. And it's not like they played terrible in the out-of-conference either. Do you think you could see a scenario where they can get bumped all the way up to the 6th seed?
No. Maybe 7. Just their road record is pretty horrible too. I think they just have one. Obviously they did run through the Big Ten regular season at home, perfect 10-0, but they are 1-8 at home on the road in the Big Ten, and they end the season against Michigan on the road. There's not an easier team to play on the road than them at this point. I think 7's probably the limit for them. They did beat Kansas State on the road. Unfortunately for them, the Wildcats haven't really turned out. Kansas State was a tournament team. Well, then maybe. But they did beat Purdue. Don't think the Big Ten tournament means a whole lot for them. They're in the tournament. You already beat Purdue once. Is a second Purdue win really going to push you that much further up? I don't think so. But they're a double bye. Good for them. Good for Fred Hoiberg. But I think they're... Unless they get a Big Ten tournament win or championship game, I think they're headed for the 8-9 game.
Absolutely. And then I think probably your biggest controversial, maybe your only controversial pick here in the bracketology has got to be South Florida at the 12 line. They're currently a top 25 team. Now they've got those quad 4 losses, some really painful losses in November, but Sean, a 12 seed?
Yeah, so it's either them. There's really 4 teams. Well, you might be able to stretch it to 5, but for me, there's 4 teams for those first 2 11 seeds, and it's the 4 teams that are there: USF, Richmond, Indiana State, or Princeton. or whoever happens to be the Ivy champ. It could be Yale, it could be Cornell. Those teams are all ranked pretty well. Cornell maybe a 13, but Yale up there too. It really just comes down to, Mike, while they probably are playing like a top 25 team now, you do have to keep into account those early season losses, and it really stinks for them that they lost those, because if they had played well in those and maybe lost one or two of them, they're looking at an at-large bid, 7th seed, something like that. But
you don't see an at-large future for South Florida. You think they got to win or they're out?
I do think they have to win. Yeah, just one loss in the American is really good, but they didn't beat anybody huge in the non-conference to make up for it. They're still in the 80s in the metrics and stuff at the beginning of the day. They did beat Tulane by 13, which is so they were favored by 8. So maybe the numbers boost up a little bit there, but it really stinks for them. Quad 4 home losses, big loss to Hofstra and UMass. These are 500 teams in mid-major conferences. So unfortunately for them, those games still count for the committee. But maybe they get to an 11, but I don't think they're an at-large consideration at this point.
That's fair.
That's all for bracketology. And we're going to pick some games, Mike, before we sign off for the day. We're going to start off with the 3 games tomorrow that are big. We've got Tennessee on the road at South Carolina. Can the Gamecocks get the job done? Or will Tennessee get their revenge and most likely an SEC title?
I think Tennessee's going to punch their ticket to the 1 line tomorrow with a huge win on the road against South Carolina. South Carolina, they've struggled. I think we still are not sure how good they really are, but we know about Tennessee. We know how powerful some of their star players are, including Dalton Knecht, and I think he's going to carry them to a victory.
Yeah, I'm going to go with South Carolina, Mike. They did it once. They can do it in front of their home fans. They got to believe it. Knecht had a bad game last time out. See if they can make that happen again. But it'll be a good one. Tennessee, 5.5-point favorites. A little bit odd there. That game will be at 7 o'clock tomorrow, which is Wednesday on ESPN2. 8:30, Mike, on FS1. We've got UConn going on the road to Marquette. Same line. The visitors are favored by 5.5. I can't take Marquette without Kolek. Oso still might not even play. UConn, while they might not be playing for anything, they're still going to get the job done here.
Yeah, I think this is going to be I think this could be a better game than expected, but albeit UConn is the road team, I think they're going to get the job done here, and they might get it done by double digits even.
Big 12 ranked battle, Mike, in Hilton Coliseum. Iowa State has a chance to finish their conference season undefeated at home. They host BYU. BYU has a shocking road win in them, as they proved last week at Fog Allen. But any chance that they upset the Hilton Magic?
This might be a little bit of wishful thinking, but I'm going to go with BYU Cougars. I want the Bears to get the 2 seed in the Big 12 tournament. And hey, I'm going to be pulling for the Cougars. They got a giant, massive road victory last week against KU. Why not do it again at Hilton Coliseum?
That's a bold pick, Mike. Fog's probably a tougher place to play than Hilton. Probably one of the 2 or 3 tougher arenas to play in the country. I'm going to go with Iowa State. I just can't see it. But BYU, now that would be a seed line. Well, we talked about their Kansas win being a seed line mover. This could be a 2 seed line mover. They might throw the Big 12 into like a total hurricane mode with the committee with 5 teams. 5 teams good enough to be a 4 seed and only 4 teams can be there. Trust me, the committee wants Iowa State to win this game, because if they don't, BYU's going to have to get protected seed consideration. And they can't have 5, the Big 12. So that'll be an interesting to see how that plays out if that is the case. And we've got Friday, Mike. Last game we're going to pick. Maybe we do get an episode in before the weekend, but if not, we'll just pick and post without it. We've got Boise State going on the road to face San Diego State, a Mountain West title potentially on the line here. San Diego State at 11-5, Boise tied with Utah State at 12-4. Another tournament, Mike, that's going to be sneaky good is the Mountain West. You've got the 8 seed in this league. 7 seed in this league He's going to be Colorado State, who's going to be an at-large selection. So, would not.
Yeah.
Whoever wins this league is going to have to play them in the second round. Not what they expected. But
Good luck. Thoughts and prayers.
Can Boise go down into Viejas and get a victory and win the Mountain West?
I think they can, but I don't think they will. San Diego State's been really impressive this year at home. They're 14-0. They're playing good basketball right now. They're ranked 21st in the country. I'm going to go with the Aztecs to get the win in San Diego.
I think we have started to see a little bit of a switch there's a lot of good Mountain West teams, and the home teams win all the games. I think we've started to see some road teams win games. A couple of teams have gone into the pit and knocked off New Mexico. A couple teams have beat Boise. A couple teams have beat, Utah State is a home loss. The only team that doesn't have a home loss, Mike, San Diego State. They're going to finish the job and finish the regular season. They'll be 16-0 or 15-0 at home. They play UNLV on the road tonight. But I'm taking the Aztecs too. But Boise, big chance for a seed line mover. For them, I got them on the 7 line. They seem to have kind of broken out of the group, the mishmash, as I've been saying. When I did the projection, I'm like, well, Texas Tech, Florida, St. Mary's have had pretty good years. Somebody else has to go here.
Yeah.
And I picked Boise, and I think they're 7-8. You want to stay out of that 8-9 game if all possible. And they've got a chance to definitely stay out of it if they win this game. But Mike, 45 minutes, a little longer today. Obviously, a lot to talk about. So we're going to wrap it up here. Not sure when we'll see you next. Hopefully soon. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast.